Fluorescent lights in the corner store buzzed like angry insects, bleaching everything into a sick yellow that made my face in the glass door look hollow. My fingers shook as I flattened the bills on the counter, smoothing them like they might multiply if I begged quietly enough. 2 20s, a 10, 3 5s, a scatter of ones. $312. The bottle of prenatal vitamins the clinic insisted on sat behind the register like a taunt. I could buy them, or I could buy groceries for the week. I could not do both. I pressed my palm to my lower belly, feeling the small, stubborn curve under my thrift store sweater. 18 weeks. Long enough that the baby had a schedule of its own, fluttering when I finally lay down, going still when I panicked. Unlong enough that strangers had started looking at me the way people look at a storm they can see coming. I had been Dominic Falcone's wife once. Now I was Mia Carter, divorced, pregnant, and counting crumpled money beside the gum display. I didn't miss the penthouse, or the car that warmed my seat before I got inside, or the closet full of clothes with price tags that looked like typos. I missed the feeling of being certain the floor wouldn't drop out from under me. I missed security that didn't require me to scan my bank app before deciding whether I deserved dinner. The night Dominic asked for a divorce, I thought I was losing him. I didn't realize I was also losing the safety net he'd quietly woven around my life. The cashier watched me with the neutral patience of someone who had seen every kind of broken. I slid the bills back into my pocket, because rent was due in 4 days, and my refrigerator was already making that sad, empty hum. Outside, the door chimed and the October air slapped me awake. I walked fast, shoulders up, thin jacket snapping in the wind. The good coat was gone. I'd sold it a month ago, along with the last bracelet Dominic ever clasped around my wrist, because warmth is expensive when you're alone. At 10:10 at night, Chicago has 2 faces: the postcard skyline in the distance and the cracked sidewalks under your feet. I headed toward the bus stop by the laundromat, past storefronts with metal grates pulled down like closed eyelids. A city bus hissed somewhere a block away, brakes squealing, but my stop was quiet. One elderly woman stood there gripping her purse, eyes sliding over me and then away, eye pity mixed with relief. I sat on the cold plastic bench and pulled out my phone. The screen was spiderwebbed from last week's drop, and there were no new messages. Not even the kind from companies that pretend to care about your expired warranty. I tried not to resent that woman for being cautious. In this neighborhood, kindness can turn into a problem you can't afford. Still, my throat tightened. I used to have friends who would have insisted I eat, who would have driven me home, who would have made a joke to keep me from crying. Most of them had been Dominic's friends first, and after the divorce they evaporated like mist on hot pavement. I stared across the street at a stray cat nosing through a torn trash bag, and I felt my own body start to tilt, slowly at first, like a chair leg giving way. The dizziness was a wave, sudden and rude. My hands clamped around the edge of the bench, knuckles whitening as my vision tunneled. Not now. Please. I hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, half a bagel I'd found in the diner break room before my shift. My manager had cut my hours when I had to sit down, pale and sweating. He told me pregnant girls didn't look good for business, like my body was a marketing choice. I swallowed hard, tasting bile and shame, and tried to stand because the 24-hour clinic was only a few blocks away, and my baby deserved better than me collapsing beside a bus schedule. My legs buckled anyway. I hit the pavement on my knees, palms scraping against loose gravel, the sting sharp enough to make my eyes water. The elderly woman made a small sound behind me, but she didn't move. I couldn't blame her. The sidewalk was cold, and my cheek found it like a surrender. Streetlights smeared into gold streaks. I focused on one thing: the weight inside me, the quiet persistence of this life that kept going even when I felt emptied out. I wasn't giving up. I had just run out of clean choices. I heard the bus coming, brakes whining, but the sound drifted away as darkness crept in from the edges of my sight. My phone slipped from my hand and clattered, too loud in the empty street. I thought about the vitamins on the shelf, and the rent notice on my door, and the baby's heartbeat on my last ultrasound, steady as a promise. Then another noise cut through it all. Tires screeching, not the bus, sharper, closer. A car door slammed with certainty. Footsteps rushed toward me. A familiar cologne reached me before the face did. Cedar and smoke and danger that once felt like home. Dominic Falcone should not have known exactly where I was. Sound came first, a steady beep that matched my pulse. Then the softness beneath me, thick and cool, nothing like the scratchy sheets in my studio. I forced my eyes open and met a ceiling so white it looked untouched, lit by a warm lamp instead of harsh fluorescence. For a second I thought I was still on the sidewalk, dreaming my way out of it. The air smelled clean, floral, with antiseptic underneath. The room was too quiet for a public hospital. No carts, no distant TVs, just silence and the muffled tread of shoes beyond a closed door. My throat felt like sandpaper. I tried to swallow and panic flared until I noticed the IV taped to my arm and the cool drip feeding my veins. I shifted. Pain pinched through my knees and the palm I had scraped on gravel. Memory slammed back. The bus stop, the cold bench, my legs folding. I jerked my hand to my belly. The curve was still there. The baby was still there. Relief hit so hard my eyes burned. I listened for movement and heard only the monitor translating my heartbeat into that stubborn beep. What if the fall had hurt her? What if my body had failed us both? A low murmur seeped through the wall, voices kept down but tense. I could not catch the words, yet I knew the pattern. One voice was quick and practical, reporting facts. The other was slower, deeper, controlled to the edge of breaking. When that control cracked, even briefly, fear leaked through. I recognized it the way you recognize thunder before rain. Dominic. My chest tightened with anger and something worse, a longing I hated. I had tried not to say his name since the divorce, like silence could cauterize the wound. Now it was back, wrapped around me, unavoidable. I turned toward the window. The Chicago skyline glittered, softened by haze, lights like scattered pearls. I was high up. I was safe. That should have comforted me. Instead, it felt like a trap with a view. The door opened and a woman in scrubs stepped in, calm eyes scanning machines, then me. Dr. Julia Park. I had met her once during my marriage, discreet and unflinching, the kind of doctor who understood certain patients came with shadows. She checked my IV, glanced at the monitor, and her steady presence anchored me. My tongue felt heavy, my mouth dry, my body weak in a way that embarrassed me. Dominic entered behind her, and the room seemed to shrink around him. He looked like he had not slept in days. His hair was slightly off, his jaw rough with stubble, his shoulders tight beneath a dark sweater that made him look almost ordinary and somehow more dangerous for it. His eyes found me and held, not cold, not distant, uncovered. Guilt sat on him like weight. Humiliation crawled up my throat. I pictured myself face down on concrete while he stood over me like a hero arriving late. I tried to sit up and immediately swayed. Dr. Park moved in and guided me back with gentleness. She did not need to lecture. My body had already confessed everything. In my head, I listed the facts like inventory. Dehydrated, anemic, malnourished, pregnant. The words were not meant as blame, but they landed like it anyway. Dominic watched every twitch of discomfort as if he could measure how close he had come to losing us. I hated that my weakness gave him permission to look at me like I was fragile. I hated, too, that part of me wanted someone to care that much. Dr. Park finished her checks and stepped aside. Dominic moved closer, stopping just short of touching me, as if the divorce papers were a physical barrier he could feel. That hesitation cut deeper than any apology. It told me he knew he had no right to be here, and he had come anyway. My voice finally worked, thin and rough. I did not trust it, so I kept my face still and my breathing steady, pretending control I did not have. Questions stacked in my chest. How did he find me? Why was I in a private suite? How long had I been out? And why did it take me collapsing for him to appear? The answer arrived without grand speeches, in the way his gaze flicked away when he realized I understood. He had known where I was after the divorce. Not every step, not every hour, but enough. Eyes on me, he called it. A distant shield to keep me safe. Protection from the shadows. The word protection should have felt like a blanket. It felt like a hand over my mouth. Rage steadied me better than the IV. If he had eyes on me, he had watched me shrink my life down to rent receipts and ramen cups. He had watched me sell my coat, skip meals, count $312 under buzzing lights, and still decide vitamins were a luxury. He had watched the dark circles deepen under my eyes and done nothing until my body hit the pavement. If he could place eyes on me without my consent, what else had he arranged and controlled while telling himself he was setting me free? And if this was his version of safety, what did freedom even mean anymore? By early morning, Dr. Julia Park declared I was stable enough to move, as long as I didn't pretend I was stronger than I was. The phrase stable felt laughable. My limbs were heavy, my mouth still tasted like pennies, and every time I sat up, the room tilted. 2 men in dark coats appeared at the door, polite in the way professionals are, scanning the hallway before anything happened. Dominic hovered close without touching, like proximity was the only apology he knew how to give. I was wheeled through a private elevator that smelled of lemon polish, past mirrored walls that threw my pale face back at me. I kept one hand on my belly, counting heartbeats, asking myself how a woman goes from counting $312 to being escorted like a state secret. The car was quiet, windows tinted so the city became watercolor. I tried to read the streets for familiarity, but we moved too smoothly, the suspension swallowing every pothole that used to rattle my bones on the bus. When we stopped, the lobby looked like a museum. Stone floors, fresh flowers, a doorman who didn't blink at the sight of me in borrowed sweats and hospital socks. My old life had always been designed to feel effortless, as if money made gravity optional. The elevator rose in silence, numbers climbing, my ears popping. When the doors opened, the penthouse greeted me with its perfect emptiness. Glass walls, a skyline view, furniture arranged like no one ever cried here. I felt like a ghost returning to haunt a place that had already replaced me. Dominic guided me down a corridor lined with art I remembered pretending to understand. He stopped at the master bedroom door and did not open it. Instead, he turned to a suite farther away, one I had once offered to guests with casual generosity, like space was infinite. The bedspread was smooth, the lamps warm, the bathroom marble, and the closet bigger than my entire apartment. The choice should have felt considerate. It also felt like a verdict. We were not married, not strangers, not anything that had a name. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my hands, still scraped, still real. In the silence, I could hear the city far below and the faint click of a lock that wasn't meant to sound like one. Within minutes, the room filled with his solutions. A tray appeared with broth, toast, and fruit cut into neat cubes, as if my body could be repaired by symmetry. A folder landed on the dresser with appointment times written in a clean hand. Follow-up labs, nutrition consult, a home visit from Dr. Park. I watched security cameras blink in the corner of my vision and hated how quickly I noticed them now. Dominic moved through the space like a commander setting up a field station, checking windows, testing locks, speaking to someone outside the door. I didn't need to hear the words to know they were instructions. Part of me wanted to sink into this care, to let him carry the decisions the way he always had. Another part of me flinched at every small proof that my life could be rearranged without asking. Maybe he sensed that flinch because he finally stopped pacing. He sat in the chair opposite me, forearms on his knees, gaze fixed on the floor as if the words were weapons he had to set down carefully. What came out of him was not romance, not an excuse, but a map of danger I had never been allowed to see. Months before he filed, someone had talked in custody, spilling details about how to take me. Names, routines, the route I walked when I bought flowers at the market. Then a photo arrived, proof I could be reached whenever his enemies wanted. Another crew had started pressing into his territory, and the old rules about leaving families alone were cracking. He believed a war was coming, the kind that doesn't respect rings or vows. So he chose the cleanest cut he could imagine: remove me from the board. Let me hate him if it meant I lived. I wanted to throw something at him. I also wanted to crawl into the certainty of his arms and let him swear it would never happen again. Both impulses made me furious. I had married him knowing he carried darkness, but I had not agreed to be handled like a fragile secret. He talked about freedom as if it were a gift he could hand me, not a choice I deserved to make. The past 3 months flashed through me in sharp images. The roaches in my kitchen, the diner's greasy smell clinging to my hair, the way I rationed apples because they filled my stomach longer. That was his protection in practice, distance pretending to be mercy. Safety had become a word he used to justify silence. Then he mentioned the settlement, as if money had been the one gentle thing he could leave behind. In his mind, it had bought me stability, time, groceries, care, and I tasted bitterness and told him the truth. The lawyers handed me a single check for $50,000, and it lasted until it didn't. The room changed. He went very still, like a predator hearing a twig snap, and I knew violence had awakened. Dominic did not blink. The silence after I said $50,000 felt like the pause before thunder, the kind that makes birds vanish from a street. His hands rested on his knees, but every muscle in his forearms tightened as if he was holding back a door. I expected anger, maybe a sharp burst of blame, but what I saw was something colder: calculation. He looked past me for a second, not at the skyline, but at some invisible ledger where every mistake had a cost. Then his gaze returned to my belly, and the room seemed to narrow around us. What should have happened after the divorce was simple, and he explained in that controlled way that sounded like a report, not comfort. The agreement had not been a mercy check and goodbye. It had been $3 million set aside for me, and $20,000 each month so I could eat, rest, and grow our child without begging anyone. Hearing the numbers made my stomach lurch. I pictured the prenatal vitamins on the shelf, the rent envelope, the empty fridge. Someone had taken my safety net and watched me fall anyway. While I was counting coins, they were counting on silence and weakness. I survived by shrinking. I ate toast ends from the diner, told myself it was temporary, and drank water to quiet hunger. I chose rent over groceries so often it stopped feeling like a choice. I wore the same sweater until it pilled and smelled like old fryer oil, because laundromats cost time and time cost tips. I walked to prenatal appointments when my bus card ran low, counting steps instead of calories. Once, I stood in a pharmacy aisle and pretended to compare brands while my eyes burned, because I could not afford any of them. Not even once. Now the pattern sharpened into something ugly. The times I called Dominic's office and hit voicemail were not bad luck. The emails that never got a reply were not indifference. There had been a wall between us, built by someone with access and permission. I remembered the restaurant security guard who stared me down like I was a trespasser. The way he warned me I was not allowed to contact Dominic. The way he mentioned legal threats as if he enjoyed them. Back then, I thought Dominic wanted me erased. Tonight, I realized someone else had been erasing me too. Dominic reached for his phone with the same calm he must use when storms break in his world. His thumb moved once, twice, and I knew names were being summoned, doors being opened, accounts being checked. He did not raise his voice. He did not pace. That frightened me more than shouting would have because it meant he had already decided what justice looked like. His eyes stayed on mine as if to anchor me while his mind hunted. In that moment, he was not my ex-husband or my rescuer. He was a man built to remove problems permanently, efficiently. I lifted my hand, not to stop him from acting, but to stop him from turning me into a passenger again. My voice shook, and I hated that it did, yet I kept going. I needed the theft handled, yes, but I also needed him to hear me. I would not survive another kind of protection that required silence. I breathed the way Dr. Park coached, slow and deep, because panic could tighten my body around our baby. Dominic watched, still as stone. I felt the knife edge of his restraint. I feared what he might do, and his certainty tonight. He nodded once, not agreement so much as acceptance that I had drawn a line. The realization tasted strange, like power I never asked for. I wondered who benefited from my starvation. A crooked lawyer? A guard skimming? Someone inside his circle who thought my suffering made Dominic easier to manage. The questions stacked, sharp and endless. I refused to be soothed by money now, because money had been stolen like everything else. I wanted names, timelines, proof. I wanted my life back in my hands. The baby shifted, and it steadied me. I would learn on my terms now. Dominic's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, then at the door, as if the penthouse had ears. I felt the shift in him, the way my private suffering turned into a family-level breach. He was not just recovering stolen money. He was sealing a crack in a fortress. Outside the guest suite, footsteps passed, security moving like clockwork. Dominic decided he needed someone who understood both the family's surface and its strategy. The name landed in my mind. Evelyn. I had seen her once at our wedding, elegant and unreadable, studying me like I was a problem too. While Dominic moved pieces I couldn't see, I sat on the bed and watched the skyline, feeling safer than I'd been in months and more exposed than ever. The stolen money was not just theft. It proved someone could reach me and profit. That made me leverage, a doorway into Dominic's life. I felt it in my skin, in the way guards waited outside my door. Then a knock came, soft and confident. The door opened. An older woman stepped in dressed, eyes sharp as winter. Evelyn Falcone. She looked from my face to my belly. The board had changed. Evelyn Falcone entered my guest suite like she owned the air. Her suit was charcoal, perfectly cut, and the pearl at her throat looked less like jewelry and more like punctuation. She didn't rush, didn't soften, didn't ask permission. Her calm gaze swept over my scraped hands, the IV bruise, then settled on my belly with a precision that made me sit straighter. I felt defensive in my oversized sweater, yet starving for answers. Dominic hovered near the doorway, protective but silent. Oh, Evelyn's presence told me the story had expanded beyond heartbreak into territory where I had never been invited. She spoke in lessons, not comfort, and I absorbed them the way you absorb cold water. All at once, gasping. Evelyn didn't call me fragile. She treated me like someone who could learn, someone who must. She reminded me that carrying Dominic's child changed my name even if paper said otherwise. Enemies don't read feelings, she implied. They read opportunities. She looked at the skyline and then at the discreet camera in the corner, as if proving her point. I hated that she was right. I hated even more that I needed her to survive what was already circling us. Rule 1 was simple and brutal. Never bleed where sharks can smell it. Outside these walls, my fear would be a scent, not a secret. Evelyn described how a glance can become a report, how a casual photo can become leverage. how a friendly question can be a test. She wanted my posture steady, my smile measured, my routines predictable only to the people paid to protect me. I thought about the bus stop pity, the way strangers had cataloged my loneliness. I had believed anonymity was safety. Evelyn made me see it was exposure and I'd pay for it. Rule 2 was about trust, and it tasted bitter. I could be kind, Evelyn said in her way, but I couldn't be careless. Friends would be vetted. Deliveries would be checked. Even my doctor's schedule would be controlled. Guards weren't an insult. They were a receipt for Dominic's enemies. I wanted to argue that a life measured in protocols wasn't a life. Then I remembered choosing between food and vitamins, and in how quickly the world punished me for being alone. Safety, I realized, always comes with paperwork. In Dominic's world, it comes with men at doors watching quietly, never blinking. Rule 3 landed hardest. I could not let anyone see I was Dominic's soft spot. The moment they believed he loved me, they would use me. Evelyn didn't romanticize it. She treated it like weather. I stared at my belly and felt the cruel irony. I had wanted a baby for love, for a family, for something pure. Instead, my pregnancy was a headline in a language I didn't speak yet. I bristled at being a chess piece, but I understood I'd already been moved. The choice now was whether I'd learn to move myself before someone else chose fate. Late that morning, Dr. Julia Park returned with a portable ultrasound, and her calm steadiness quieted the room. She checked my blood pressure and the bruises on my knees, then asked about meals, sleep, dizziness. I confessed how hunger had become normal, how I'd worked through nausea, how I'd nearly fainted more than once. Dr. Park didn't scold. She treated my honesty like data that mattered. Recovery, she reminded me, was part of protecting the baby. Dominic stayed close but silent, hands clasped, eyes fixed on my face as if he could will my body to forgive him right then. The monitor lit up with a grainy miracle, and the heartbeat filled the room with a steady gallop. Dominic's face changed, ruthless distance melting into stunned softness. Dr. Park traced the tiny spine and the flutter of a hand, then guided us to the answer I wasn't ready for. We were having a girl. Dominic's breath broke and his eyes went bright. He looked older and younger at once, like love stripped him bare. He reached toward my belly with careful hands. I let him rest his palm there. The baby kicked, and tears slipped down his cheeks without permission. After Dr. Park left, Evelyn resumed her lessons as if tenderness was only a pause. She reminded me Dominic's softness could be used against him, and even an ultrasound photo could become currency in the wrong hands. I sat with that, feeling cherished and trapped. The guards outside my door were quiet, but their presence pressed on my ribs. Dominic tried to keep things gentle with food and blankets, yet I saw him check his phone like a man counting exits. I wondered if love could live inside a fortress without turning into control. Then I remembered the sidewalk again. Sleep came in scraps, and at 2:47 in the morning I woke to a hush that felt engineered. A thin line of light leaked from Dominic's office door, and a shadow crossed it, careful and slow. I pressed my hand to my belly, steadying us both. Evelyn's rules repeated in my head. Assume you are watched, never show fear. Low voices murmured behind the wall, too soft to catch, sharp enough to chill me. A chair scraped. The penthouse wasn't awake for tenderness. It was awake for consequence. Protection, I realized, had teeth, and I was done pretending starting tonight. At 2:47 in the morning, the penthouse stopped feeling like glass and art and started feeling like a command center. The air was the same temperature, the lights the same warm gold, but the silence had a different weight. I lay in the guest bed with one hand cupped over my belly, listening to the soft rhythm of guards shifting outside my door. Somewhere down the hall, Dominic's office light cut a thin line under the door, and every few minutes a muffled step crossed it like a shadow sliding over a clock. I told myself to stay put. Evelyn's rule echoed in my mind. Never bleed where sharks can smell it. But curiosity and fear are cousins, and they pulled me out of bed anyway. The carpet swallowed my footsteps as I moved toward the hallway. I didn't open doors. I didn't creep close enough to be caught. I just stood still long enough to hear the shape of what was happening. Voices rose and fell in low bursts. Names I didn't know. Numbers. The word account. The word lawyer. Then sharper, the name of the guard who had turned me away from the restaurant. The tone in Dominic's voice was controlled, almost quiet, but it carried the finality of a judge who had already read the sentence. Someone answered him with the stiff obedience of a man trying not to disappoint his boss. A chair scraped. Glass clinked. My stomach rolled. I pressed my palm to my belly as if I could shield our daughter from sound. The baby shifted, a small flutter that felt like a question. I breathed through the nausea, counting slow inhales, trying to keep my heartbeat from spiking the way it had on the sidewalk. My body remembered hunger and fear. It also remembered Dominic's world now, the part that operated after midnight when normal people slept. When the office door opened, I retreated before anyone saw me. Footsteps passed in the hall, purposeful, and the elevator chimed faintly. The penthouse exhaled again, but the quiet was no longer peaceful. It was the quiet after decisions. Dominic came to my door before dawn. He looked freshly washed, hair damp, shirt clean, but the tension in his jaw hadn't moved an inch. He didn't pretend nothing happened. He sat across from me and held my gaze like he was willing to take any hate I had left. The message I felt from him was simple. The man who stole from me and blocked me had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Fear pricked behind my ribs. I had known who Dominic was when I married him. Knowing and witnessing were different. I told him, in the only way I could, that I was terrified of what he could do when he believed he was right. I admitted something uglier too, something I didn't want to claim. Part of me felt relief. Someone had starved me while my baby grew inside me. Someone had enjoyed my silence. The thought of that person facing consequences made my skin crawl, yet it also loosened a knot in my chest. I didn't approve. I understood. The truth sat between us like a blade laid flat on a table. Dominic didn't ask me to celebrate it. He didn't try to sweet-talk it into romance. Instead, he offered me an exit. He could keep me safe and supported without asking me to live under his roof or take his name again. He could build distance, the way he tried before, but this time with real support. The offer should have felt like freedom. It felt like a rerun. Distance had nearly killed me. I surprised myself by refusing it. Not because I trusted every part of him, but because I trusted the lesson my own hunger taught me. Isolation is not safety. I told him I would not be protected by being hidden. I would be protected by being informed. Honesty became my line in the sand. No more protecting me through silence. No more decisions made for me with my signature treated like a formality. If danger was real, I wanted to see it. If a plan existed, I wanted to be part of it. Dominic listened, and for the first time since the divorce, I saw something like respect settle into his expression, heavy and sober. He explained the legal path forward without trying to soften it. Fraud around the settlement changed everything. If someone intercepted funds and restricted contact, the agreement was contaminated. That meant the divorce itself could be challenged, unwound, rewritten. Dominic's focus sharpened as he described moving quickly and quietly, with paperwork that would not leak to anyone. He wasn't talking about love. He was talking about sealing a breach around our child. I should have felt trapped by that. Instead, I felt the strange relief of clarity. The divorce hadn't freed me. It had exposed me. Undoing it wasn't romance. It was survival with a receipt. My phone buzzed in my hand, the cracked screen lighting the room. An unknown number. A single message that felt like fingers around my throat, congratulating me on returning to Dominic's side and hinting that babies make easy targets. My skin went cold. Evelyn had been right. This was no longer private repair. This was war pressure, and I was already on the board. The message sat on my cracked screen like a fingerprint on glass, proof that someone out there knew I had come back within Dominic's reach. My skin went cold, then hot, then numb. Dominic wanted to lock me in the penthouse, bury me behind guards and tinted windows until the sender surfaced. And Evelyn wanted the opposite. She said hiding me would announce weakness, and weakness was blood in the water. I listened to both, then surprised myself. I was done being moved without consent. If I was his wife again in anything but paperwork, I would stand beside him tonight. Evelyn dressed me like she was dressing a weapon, not a pregnant woman who still felt bruised from pavement. The black dress was simple, expensive, cut to skim my belly instead of hiding it. My hair went into a tight twist that kept my face bare and my eyes visible. She chose earrings that caught light with every turn of my head, a quiet reminder that I belonged to a powerful name. In the mirror, I practiced breathing low and slow. Fear wanted to climb into my throat. I kept it in my ribs, sealed behind straight shoulders all day. Miles Grant drove the lead car, and then 2 SUVs followed like shadows. Dominic sat beside me in the back seat, his hand hovering near mine without claiming it, as if he was asking permission with every breath. Chicago slid past in blurred streetlights and night traffic, normal people laughing on sidewalks, unaware of what moved under their feet. The restaurant looked ordinary from the outside. Warm windows, couples at tables, a host smiling at the door. Then we slipped through a private hallway and down a narrow staircase that smelled of old brick and wine, into the city's basement truth. A long table waited under low lights, surrounded by men in tailored suits who wore courtesy the way hunters wear camouflage. I recognized none of them, yet I recognized the energy. Polished, patient, predatory. They watched Dominic first, then me, and the air shifted when their eyes landed on my belly. Someone poured water, someone offered a chair. Every gesture looked polite, but it felt like a probe. Dominic placed me at his right hand, angled his body toward me, protective even in posture. Evelyn sat farther back, calm as a blade, letting me feel the room's temperature without flinching. Dominic spoke with a steadiness that made the men around him sit a fraction straighter. He did not perform anger, he announced a boundary. The threat text, he made clear, was not a joke, not a rumor, not a test he would ignore. I watched his jaw work once, then go still, the way it did when he decided something was final. His message landed in the room like a gavel. His wife and unborn child were untouchable. Whoever sent the threat would be delivered within 48 hours, or Dominic would start digging through their world with bare hands personally. One of the younger men leaned back with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind that suggested Dominic was overreacting. I felt the room tilt toward conflict, then hesitate, because I was sitting with my belly visible and my face uncovered. I realized my presence was leverage, not decoration. Evelyn's rule repeated in my head like a prayer. Never show fear, especially when terrified. I kept my hands folded, nails pressing into my palm where no one could see. My heartbeat hammered, but my chin stayed level. I let them study me and find nothing enough to bite. When Dominic rose, the scrape of chairs sounded like a coordinated surrender. The men offered polite nods that meant very little, and I could feel their calculations following us up the stairs. The restaurant above was loud with laughter and clinking glasses, candlelight and normal dates, a whole world that didn't know what happened under its floorboards. Dominic's hand hovered at my back as we crossed the dining room, guiding without gripping. Outside, cold air hit my cheeks, and the convoy waited at the curb. As the car door shut, I realized I had been holding my breath too long. The moment the locks clicked, my body betrayed my composure. My hands started to shake in my lap, small tremors that ran up my arms. Dominic turned toward me, and the warmth of his presence steadied me even as it scared me. He didn't scold my fear. He treated it like an aftershock. I watched light slide across his cheekbones and thought about how many people in that room could order my death with a smile. Dominic's calm was not comfort alone. It was warning. He was telling me that surviving this life required both tenderness and teeth from now. Back at the penthouse, I peeled off the dress and stared at the line it left on my skin, proof that even elegance can bruise. I tried to eat, but my appetite stayed in that basement room. The threat was still out there watching for weakness the way Evelyn promised. Her rules no longer sounded like advice. They sounded like oxygen. Dominic wanted me sealed behind security. I wanted one errand, one catalog, one laugh. I placed my phone on the nightstand like it was a wire. In the dark, I understood the worst part. Danger had learned my name. By late morning, Dominic tried to give me something that looked like normal. Miles drove us to a boutique on the Gold Coast where everything smelled of lavender and money. Cribs lined the walls like tiny castles. A clerk offered me chamomile tea and spoke softly, as if pregnancy made me fragile porcelain. My body had survived hunger and sidewalks, not porcelain. I let myself touch a row of baby blankets. Soft. For 10 minutes I pretended I was just another woman choosing colors instead of calculating threats. I pictured a nursery, a rocking chair, a life that didn't need armed men at the door. My hand drifted to my belly and I felt a small kick, like my daughter reminding me she was real. The sweetness of that moment loosened something in my chest. Then my phone vibrated. Unknown number. Again. I stared at the screen, the cracked glass catching the boutique lights, and dread poured through me so fast I tasted metal. The message wasn't clever this time. It was personal. It implied someone could reach me anywhere, that Dominic's protection was a story he told himself, and that my baby was the easiest way to make him bleed. The room tilted. My fingers went numb and the phone slipped. The sound of it hitting the floor seemed too loud. Evelyn's face sharpened. Miles was already moving, his body between me and the front windows, his hand guiding my elbow like a steering wheel. I felt hands around me. Not rough, just urgent, as if time had suddenly turned expensive. The boutique became noise and blur. I heard a distant gasp from the clerk, the scrape of hangers, someone calling my name, but it all sounded far away. Miles pushed me through a back door I hadn't noticed, down a service hallway that smelled of cardboard, into a waiting SUV. He didn't explain. He didn't soften. He followed orders the way gravity follows the earth. As the door shut, my breathing came in short, stuttering pulls. I tried calling Dominic. Straight to voicemail. I tried Evelyn. Nothing. The car surged forward and Chicago blurred into gray streaks. We drove for 40 minutes, turning often, doubling back, taking ramps and side streets until my sense of direction dissolved. The city's familiar edges gave way to suburbs and then to quiet roads lined with bare trees. The safe house rose behind a wrought iron gate like a private fortress. High walls, cameras tucked into corners, guards posted with the stillness of statues. Inside, the decor was warm on purpose. Soft couches, art that looked chosen for comfort, a kitchen stocked like a magazine spread. It should have felt reassuring. Instead, it felt like a cage with nicer locks. Hours stretched. I paced until my legs trembled, then sat, then paced again. My hands kept returning to my belly, counting kicks like beads on a rosary. Each time my fear spiked, my daughter moved restlessly, and guilt hit me like a bruise. I whispered apologies into the air, promising her I would learn how to be calm in storms, even if I had to fake it at first. Miles stayed near the door, face unreadable, phone pressed to his ear every few minutes. He wouldn't meet my eyes long enough for me to pull answers out of him. I hated him for that and loved him for it in the same breath. He was doing what Dominic had ordered, keep me alive, no matter what it cost my feelings. When the front door finally opened, I didn't hear it so much as feel it. The air changed. Dominic walked in like a storm that had found its center. His shirt was spattered with dark red, not enough to soak, just enough to turn my stomach. I searched his face first, then his hands, and relief flooded me when I saw he was uninjured. Whatever that blood was, it wasn't his. He crossed the room and checked me with his eyes the way someone checks a locked door, scanning for cracks. My body leaned toward him before my pride could stop it. Fear makes you honest. He smelled like cold air and adrenaline, and that familiar cedar edge that had haunted me since the bus stop. The story came out in fragments I stitched together. The threat had been traced to a rival crew's territory. Not the boss, but a nephew, ambitious and stupid, trying to force a war and prove he deserved a throne. The rival leader had delivered him to Dominic within hours to avoid being crushed. Dominic had made the response unmistakable. He used the word handled, and I understood it meant there would be no second message from that number. I should have been horrified. Part of me was. Another part, darker and quieter, felt something like satisfaction settle in my chest. My baby would not be used as leverage today. The thought made me sick and steady at once. I didn't like what it said about me, but I couldn't deny the relief. Dominic didn't linger in the aftermath. He made a new decision, colder than the last. We were leaving Chicago tonight, off the grid, a property far enough that casual threats couldn't reach us until every loose end was cut. He promised peace, whatever it costs, and the scariest part was how much I believed him. That night we left Chicago in a convoy of 3 black vehicles, sliding through traffic like we belonged to a different set of laws. I watched the skyline shrink in the rear window and felt my throat tighten, not from nostalgia, but from relief so sharp it hurt. Miles drove the lead SUV, steady as a metronome, while Dominic sat beside me with his hand hovering near mine, never forcing touch. The city lights faded, replaced by dark highways and long stretches of quiet. I kept one palm over my belly, counting breaths until dawn and listening to the tires. The property was tucked into the mountains where cell service flickered, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. A modern lodge sat above a dark lake, windows tall enough to swallow the sky. Mist floated over the water at sunrise, softening everything into silver. It looked peaceful until I noticed the perimeter lights. The cameras angled like watchful birds, and the guards pacing the tree line with quiet discipline. Inside, the air smelled of pine and wood smoke, and a stone fireplace waited like a promise. Peace here came with passwords and patrol routes. My shoulders dropped for the first time. In the first days, Dominic treated my body like a fragile project he was desperate to finish correctly. Meals arrived on a schedule: broth, fruit, whole grains, protein, all carefully chosen to rebuild what hunger had stolen. I ate slowly, waiting for shame to rise, but it didn't. My bones seemed to drink the calories. I slept in long stretches, waking to the crackle of the fire and the soft murmur of radios outside. Miles checked doors, checked windows, checked routes, and never once made me feel like a burden. The baby responded to rest with steadier, a stronger movement too. By afternoon, we would sit on the dock wrapped in blankets, the lake breathing mist around us. I read pregnancy books I used to laugh at, while Dominic listened with a seriousness that made me ache. Sometimes he set his palm on my belly and spoke softly in Italian, not performing, just introducing himself to our daughter as if she could already recognize his voice. When she kicked, his face softened in stunned gratitude, and I felt the distance between us narrow by inches. At night we cooked together, simple food, sharing quiet tasks that almost felt ordinary again, briefly. Normal never lasted long. A secure phone line rang with a tone that sounded nothing like civilian life, and Dominic would step into the den, shoulders tightening, voice dropping. I never heard details, but I recognized urgency in the way he washed his hands afterward, like he could rinse away responsibility. Outside, guards rotated shifts with precision, headlights sweeping the drive hourly. Cameras clicked faintly when wind moved branches. Even the quiet had electronics inside it. I learned to notice which doors were locked, which windows were reinforced, and how Miles scanned the tree line before letting me walk outside. After a week, my cheeks looked less hollow, and my hands stopped trembling when I stood. The baby grew louder inside me, little punches and rolls that made my stomach ripple under shirts. Dominic started laughing when he felt the movement, a rough, surprised sound that belonged to another life. I wrote down possible names in a notebook, then crossed them out, then wrote them again. Some mornings we watched fog lift from the lake and pretended we were simply a couple on vacation, not fugitives from our own city. The lie tasted sweet until the radios crackled outside again. The call came in the afternoon, and Dominic's posture changed before he even spoke. I watched his eyes narrow, the same predator focus I saw in the penthouse. When he hung up, I understood enough. The Petrov group was pushing, territory disputes rising, men testing boundaries while he was away. Dominic wanted to go back and handle it personally, as if distance was weakness. Evelyn's voice came through the line later, firm and unshaken, insisting the city could be managed by her and Miles. My role surprised me. I agreed, reminding Dominic that protecting the air was leadership, not retreat. Dominic paced the lodge that evening, all torn between the pull of his empire and the promise he made to keep us alive. I didn't beg or soften it. I used Evelyn's logic. If he died chasing control, our daughter would inherit chaos. If he stayed, his people would learn to function without him, and that made the machine stronger. He finally sat beside me on the couch, exhaustion in his shoulders, and let my hand guide his to my belly. The baby kicked, his breathing slowed, and I felt strategy become love. Outside, guards circled, and the lake stayed silent. 3 weeks later, the peace broke without warning. I woke at 5:18 in the morning to a pain that stole my breath and folded me around it. At first I thought it was a dream, the kind hunger used to give me, but then it returned, deeper, rhythmic, undeniable. Dominic was awake instantly, our fear flashing across his face before he locked it down. I gripped the sheet, trying to breathe the way Dr. Park taught me, and I felt my daughter push hard against my ribs. Everything blurred, and I knew time was out. She was coming now fast. At 5:18 in the morning, the first contraction snapped me awake, sharp enough to steal my breath and bend me toward my belly. Dominic was moving before I could even sit up, hands steady, eyes already counting options. He called for Dr. Julia Park on the secure line, then for Miles to wake the perimeter team. Boots thudded softly downstairs. A generator hummed, lights brightened, and the lake outside vanished into darkness. I clutched the sheet and breathed slow, trying to keep panic from tightening around our daughter. Another wave hit, closer than the last, and everything narrowed again. Within minutes, they had the helicopter warming on the pad, rotors chopping the cold air into a roar. I was wrapped in blankets, seatbelt clipped across my hips, oxygen line tucked under my nose. Dominic sat close, one hand braced behind my shoulders, the other on my knee whenever the pain rose. He didn't speak much. His calm lived in the way he watched my breathing and matched it, like he could lend me rhythm. Below us, the forest rolled past, black and endless. I wondered if safety always required flight. Dr. Park met us at the roof, ready. The private hospital suite looked like a hotel room that happened to contain machines, soft art on the walls, and a view of distant city lights. Dr. Park moved with quiet confidence, checking monitors, confirming our daughter's heartbeat, adjusting IV fluids as if she was smoothing wrinkles from a sheet. Her steadiness gave me something to hold on to. Dominic stayed at my side, letting me squeeze his fingers until my knuckles ached, wiping my forehead between waves, placing cool cloths at my neck. Pain came in surges, then released me into seconds of exhausted gratitude until the next wave hit. Hours blurred into breath counts. I focused on small commands from my own body. Inhale, release, softened shoulders, unclenched jaw. Dr. Park guided me through it with simple motions and calm eyes, and Dominic mirrored every instruction with his presence, as if he could absorb my fear by holding it first. When I was finally told to push, it felt like trying to move a mountain with my ribs. I gripped the bedrail, cried out without dignity, and then found strength in the thought that our daughter had survived my worst days already. She deserved my best moment right then. The room went strangely quiet at the end, as if everyone held their breath with me. Then a sound cut through everything, thin and furious and perfect. Dr. Park lifted a tiny bundle toward my chest, and the weight of her settled me into reality. Dominic's face crumpled, tears spilling without shame as he touched our daughter with hands that usually carried authority. I studied her wrinkled brow and dark eyes and felt my own tears fall. Dominic leaned close, almost reverent, and I agreed when he offered the name Elena, honoring the mother he lost too young for him. The next days were a haze of feeding, sleeping, and learning our daughter's moods. Dominic surprised me most. At 3 a.m, he paced the suite with Elena against his shoulder, humming low and steady, the melody carrying tenderness instead of menace. He changed diapers with fierce concentration, folded tiny clothes like they mattered, and watched her sleep as if he could memorize her breathing. Evelyn visited once, her eyes glassy despite her iron posture, then slipped away before anyone could mention it. I healed, stitched together by rest and certainty that Elena was ours, never anyone's leverage again. After a short recovery, Dominic brought us back toward Chicago in daylight, but the car didn't turn toward the high-rise. We drove into a quiet neighborhood lined with trees and brick stoops, the kind of place where kids rode bikes and neighbors waved. A renovated brownstone waited with flower boxes and a small garden. Nothing flashy, just solid. Inside, warm rugs softened the floors. The nursery upstairs smelled of fresh paint, and security was invisible. Cameras tucked into molding, locks disguised as normal hardware. I stood in the hallway holding Elena and felt disbelief turn into gratitude at last. Dominic watched my reaction like a man waiting for verdict, then showed me his real change. He was stepping back from running the city day to day. Miles would handle operations, Evelyn would enforce alliances, and Dominic would become an advisor instead of the king. He didn't pretend it was easy. I could see the weight in the way he stared at his hands, scarred and capable. I remembered the divorce, how he tried to protect me by leaving me. Now he was protecting us by staying, even if it meant letting go of an empire built to obey him. Before the day ended, he led me to a back room with shelves and a desk facing the garden. He made it mine, a space for school, for plans, for work that belonged to me. The gesture cracked something open. I had dropped out when I married him, telling myself love was enough, and then I learned how quickly love can become loneliness without support. Standing there, I felt ambition stir again, sharper because I knew hunger by name. I pictured women like me at bus stops counting bills, and I understood my pain could be turned into help today. Standing in the small study at the back of our brownstone, I ran my fingers along the empty bookshelf Dominic had built for me, and felt the same tightness I used to feel at the bus stop. Not the cold, but the memory of it. The desk faced the garden, where Elena's stroller rested in a patch of sun. And I realized my worst season had given me a map. I knew what it felt like to be pregnant and invisible, to count dollars and count kicks, to pray for help and hear only silence. I could not erase that, but I could use it. I started with a notebook and a name, Elena's Harbor, a place for women who were standing where I once stood, knees shaking, stomach hollow, wondering how they would survive one more week. I called Dr. Julia Park and asked which clinics were drowning, which social workers were exhausted, which gaps swallowed mothers whole. I filled out forms until my hand cramped. I learned the language of nonprofits the way I learned the language of fear, fast and unwilling. Incorporation, bylaws, grants, partnerships. I made checklists and taped them to the wall like tiny promises. The hardest part was the last name on my mailbox. I wanted Elena's Harbor to be clean, legitimate, separate from everything that had ever bruised a life. Yet I couldn't pretend the Falcone name didn't open doors. Sometimes it felt like a key I didn't deserve to hold. I argued with myself while Elena slept. If I used the name, was I helping women? Or was I laundering legacy? If I refused it, was I protecting my pride at the cost of someone else's safety? In the end, I chose honesty. I would use every legal advantage available, but I would never lie about where resources came from, and I would never let fear be the foundation. The first partner clinic was a small place on the south side that smelled like disinfectant and cheap coffee. They had compassion, not capacity. I sat with the director and listened to her describe women who missed appointments because buses were late. Women who couldn't keep down vitamins because they hadn't eaten. Women who stayed with dangerous men because rent was louder than dignity. I didn't tell her my whole story. I didn't need to. My eyes and my hands did it for me. When she agreed to work with Elena's Harbor, it felt like my life finally turned a corner. Our first client was a waitress with cracked cuticles and a tired smile. She was pregnant, alone, and trying to hide it at work the way I once did. She kept apologizing for taking up space, for needing anything. I recognized the reflex immediately. I helped her fill out paperwork for prenatal coverage, then connected her with a temporary apartment above a community center and a job training program that didn't punish sickness. When she left, she held my hand for a second longer than necessary. That moment hit me like a wave, because I realized I wasn't saving strangers. I was reaching backward through time to pull myself off that sidewalk. At home, Elena grew into her name. She slept in the nursery upstairs beneath painted clouds, and the whole house learned her schedule. Dominic became the kind of father I used to think existed only in commercials. He warmed bottles, rocked her when she cried, and folded baby clothes with a seriousness that made me laugh even on hard days. He still carried vigilance in his posture, but it no longer ruled our hours. He was home for dinner more often than not, and when work pulled him away, Miles was the one who quietly made sure it stayed at a distance. Miles surprised me too. At first he felt like a wall, loyal to orders, unmovable. Over time he softened around Elena, careful and quiet, and he installed a safer lock on the garden gate, brought groceries when my hands were full, and drove me to meetings without asking for praise. Evelyn called him reliable, which in her vocabulary was almost affection. Evelyn was the biggest surprise. She stayed sharp and strategic, yet Elena unraveled her in quiet ways. I watched Evelyn hold my daughter with careful hands, then hum softly when she thought no one listened. She still talked in rules and reminded me to keep my spine straight in public, but now she also asked if Elena had eaten and if I had slept. A year passed like that, stitched together by midnight feedings, grant deadlines, and small victories. Elena's Harbor helped dozens of women in its first year, not with miracles, but with steady steps. Rides to clinics, vouchers for groceries, childcare referrals, resumes polished, not interviews practiced. I learned that hope isn't a speech. It's a ride to an appointment, a warm meal, a door that locks, a phone call answered. Elena's first birthday arrived on a bright spring afternoon. We kept it small in the garden, just the people who had carried us. Evelyn, Miles, Dr. Park, and a few trusted staff from the nonprofit. Elena smashed cake with fierce joy, and Dominic wiped frosting from her cheeks with clumsy devotion, making it worse before making it better. I sat back and watched, the sun warming my shoulders, the city humming beyond the trees. For once, the sound didn't feel like a threat. 2 weeks after the party, I stared at a test in my bathroom and felt the world pause. Pregnant again. This time, fear didn't arrive first. Gratitude did, because I wasn't hungry, alone, or silenced. Or Dominic's arms steadied me while Elena babbled at our feet, and I understood the lesson my life kept repeating. Protection without truth is another kind of abandonment. Real love is partnership, shared choices, and honesty when it hurts. Home is being seen, safe. If this story touched you, please like, share, and comment your own starting over moment.